let's draw our attention away from the absolute chaos that is the, well, what can only be described as currently the only thing that can be heard in the conference hall is the sound of life support machines. And that is a description from someone who is apparently an unnamed Conservative MP at the Conservative conference. Fun times indeed still coming ahead. And of course, we're still looking forward to Rishi Sunak's big speech on Wednesday. And of course, there is, I'm doing this on Monday, but there is Liz Truss's intervention speech, which I'm sure is going to be another laugh riot when that happens. And that's happening at a Fringe event. And I keep on saying, this is why I wanted to go to the Fringe events, because you're going to get people like Liz Truss say all kinds of crazy nonsense. But we draw our eyes away from Manchester just for a more moment to have a look at what is going on with Brexit. Because, shockingly, surprise, surprise, guess what? It's costing us more to import from, wait for it, our largest trading partner. One of the things we constantly said since the beginning of all this was it doesn't matter that we leave the EU because the EU ain't going anywhere. Despite the calls of the EU is collapsing, the EU is crumbling, it's a failing market, etc., etc., those siren calls of doom for the EU have never come to pass. And we found out today that the UK has admitted that it is costing us an extra, or well, shall we say it's costing businesses, shall we say, an extra £330 million in post-Brexit charges to bring in animal products and plants. So that's your strawberries, your meat, cheeses, etc., all going up in price because it's costing the businesses that are in this sector in even more, and it is driving up food inflation because of that. Remember, couldn't Jacob Rees-Mogg, if you, of course, remember his infamous quote, food will be monumentally cheaper post-Brexit. Not when businesses in the UK are being charged an extra £330 million. How is that cheaper? But we're going to go getting on into this because, again, it's something worth covering. So, as always, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And, of course, as always, please do remember to click on the Patreon down below, the one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, there's the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on into this then, shall we? So this comes from The Guardian, with the UK admits an extra £330 million a year in charges for post-Brexit animal and plant imports. So the government has admitted it will cost businesses £330 million each year in additional charges when new post-Brexit border controls on animal and plant products are imported from the European Union are implemented next year. Lucy Neville-Roloff, the Minister for State in the Cabinet Office, also confirmed the estimated annual cost, adding that the UK needs tighter border controls to protect our international reputation, in a letter to Labour MP Stella Creasy, the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, saying it will depend greatly on how businesses adapt their business models and supply chains to integrate with the new controls regime. So these checks, if they come in next year, which is very likely that they will, going to be monumental increases in food. We're still in a cost of living crisis, That shows no sign of stopping. This is going to have a massive knock-on effect to inflation. This is going to put businesses, which, remember, many are still trying to recover from COVID. Many are still struggling with the cost of inflation. This is going to affect them monumentally. And if we get a businesses start to close because of this, this could lead us into a recession. And bear in mind, if you look at a lot of UK economists, they will say it very plainly that we are skirting the cliff edge of going into a recession. This is the reality that we are in. And a lot of it is being caused by the extra cost that Brexit has put on the UK, and it's being put on by businesses. We've gone over the numbers time and time again. We would be in still a bad state, but not a bad state as we might have been had we been in the EU, or at least in the single market and custom union. So she continued, we estimate that these new costs of the model at 330 million per annum overall across all EU imports. We have not had full biosecurity controls in place at our border since leaving the European Union. And you may have noticed we covered the case where there were 13 suspicious lorries of suspicious meats, which is how they were described. You have to wonder what else has sneaked through the radar, what else has ended up in the food chain. It's kind of worrying that they have left these checks go on, on in place for so long, because they have delayed them every single time, including Jacob Rees-Mogg himself, because they knew the extra costs this would add. Hardly taking back control, is it? So food and logistics firms have repeatedly warned that the UK's post-Brexit border strategy risks further pushing up food prices, which have already surged due to rampant inflation. In August, the government delayed for the fifth time the introduction of the post-Brexit checks on food and animal products arriving in Britain, meaning that they will not begin until the end of January 2024. The government said that the delay of the implementation from late October followed talks with the industry, which said that businesses needed more time to prepare. And it's not just the idea that they need more time to prepare, it's what the food and logistics firms have repeatedly said. Your strategy increases prices regardless. Doesn't matter that we don't have time to prepare or have our supply chains ready. It will just increase costs because we now have to do paperwork. We now have got all these extra checks, all the extra time, and that costs money. You cannot get rid of this extra paperwork that Brexit has created unless we are in the single market and customs union or in the EU. It's the only way you get rid of these. And as we've said before, Europe, our biggest single trading partner. That ain't going to change. So here we are. So this move has also been interpreted as a response to concerns that the start of checks would also further fuel food price inflation during the cost of living crisis. Although the government said that the impact of the new border strategy on the headline inflation would amount to less than 0.2% across 3 years. In a letter, the Niamh Rothfull said that the checks are required because since Britain has left the EU, it has become more challenging to intervene to combat threats to animal, plant, and human health. Gee, I wonder why it's become more challenging. She said that implementing these new border controls is essential to protect against international transmission of diseases such as salmonella and African swine fever, which are prevalent in parts of the EU, saying that it would be disastrous and undermine huge costs both to lives and livelihoods that an outbreak of these diseases could cause in the UK, she said. It would help us reduce the risk and potential impact of considerable security and biosecurity threats. Then why did you not implement them? It's not like African swine flu is a new thing. This has been going on for quite some time. Like, this isn't a new thing. But, only now, oh no, African swine flu. One of the things that these Brexiteers forget, that when the BCSE crisis broke out, France was constantly driving the EU to ban for a 10-year period all beef and dairy products coming from the EU, not the EU, from the UK. They tried and they failed because the EU constantly sided with the UK and said that there was no reason to do that. Now we are out of the EU. Why should the EU not listen to France if something else were to happen? And remember, if you know anything about the dairy industry or the British beef industry, it's still suffering majorly from the BCSE crisis, a crisis that happened in the 90s. What if something else were to happen to the pork sector, those pork markets that Liz Truss loves so much? There's a lot of potential downsides that could happen, and people forget, and the Brexiteers especially forget, if we weren't in the EU, France would have succeeded, and there would have been a 10-year moratorium on the beef and dairy industry in the UK, which would have absolutely destroyed that industry. And people forget that. But anyway, we continue. So Neil Roth has said that the outbreak of a major disease could have a much more significant financial impact than the extra animal cost the industry is expected to have to pay. She cited the examples of the outbreak of foot and mouth disease in 2001, which cost the equivalent of over £12.8 billion in 2022 prices. Of this, the cost to the government was about £4.8 billion, while the private sector bill was over £8 billion, saying we must also protect our international reputation. The continued lack of import controls on animal and plant products risks our trade partners losing confidence in the quality of our exports, particularly if there is a serious outbreak, as we mentioned with the BCSE crisis. She said that about half of the £330 million in the extra costs would be for expert health certificates, something, again, we did not need before. However, she has said that this reduction on the initial 52 million annual estimate until the government decided to introduce the less onerous border controls earlier this year. That's still a lot of money. Congratulations that you managed to get it down from 520 million to 330 million, but that's still a lot of money cost to British logistics and food companies. So Creasy warned that it would ultimately be the consumers who would end up paying more for food products as firms pass on these higher costs through price rises, saying that British companies will struggle with border paperwork to import food, will have little choice with these charges, meaning that it is British customers who will have to pick up the bill, she said. From the 30th of January, the imports of items including medium-risk animal products, plant products, and high-risk food of non-animal origin from the EU will require health certificates, followed by physical inspections of those goods at the UK border from the end of April next year. And remember, that's going to add to queue times. It's been a while since we've talked about queues at Dover, but they're still happening. They're just not in the news anymore. They're still happening. There are still queues down at Dover. But now you've got to add all these checks on this side to carry out. Those queues get bigger. That causes even more problems. So, in the final phase, the safety and security declarations for EU imports will come into force in the end of October 2024, with physical checks costing up to £43 a time. That may not sound much, but if you're constantly sending exports, that £43 can sure add up. However, farmers and veterinary groups have also welcomed these new border controls, saying that as well as protecting biosecurity, it will help level the terms of trade for British exporters who have faced full EU border checks since the 1st of January 2021. Again, this is a cost we didn't have to pay before. Stuff that Brexiteers said, it will never happen. They won't charge us this stuff. That'll be nonsense. There was, of course, the fanciful talks of creating a digital border, which never happened because you have to have physical checks, as you can see here. But they said, no, you don't have to have physical checks at all because, after all, nothing's going to change. We're going to keep with the same standards, rules, and regulations. That hasn't been the case, as we've seen so far. That is what they've continued to chime on about. The magic of it all. This is going to be a massive extra cost to businesses that they didn't have to pay before. This is an additional cost to British businesses getting stuff from our largest trade partner. This isn't going to go well with British businesses. Yeah, farmers, okay, we're happy. Levels the playing field out because, that we've had to, do checks coming from there. Now they have to come checks doing from here. Well, here's the thing. As we've seen with many other European companies, logistics companies, why do business with the EU? Why do business with the UK anymore? We've seen that happen. We've seen that happen. Why send stuff to the UK when we've got customers in Spain, Italy, Belgium, wherever in Europe where we can send that to? Just because those checks have come on, that will have a knock on, that will have an impact. You will see companies saying, what's the point? They've already seen it happen. It will happen again. And that will be bad because you are now lowering the amount of food coming into the UK. We are an island. That is a problem. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.